Can
How's it
you?
going?
It's going really well. How are you?
Doing well.
I would like to start this interview off with you detailing your youth sport experience and how you ended up in basketball.
Yeah, so I was born as a military kid. My dad joined the military out of college, and my parents moved to Germany, which is where I was born. They really used sport in my military moving to help me integrate into new communities. So, starting at a really early age, they would just introduce me into new sports when we moved. I played tennis, softball. We were in bowling leagues. And then it was really getting towards high school. My dad retired in San Antonio, where I solidified basketball as both the sport that I was interested in and then had a bit more kind of natural athletic abilities. Softball was not jiving as I was getting taller. It was getting harder to field some of those ground balls, but really landed in basketball in my high school career and would say I kind of specialized a little bit late. I didn't start playing basketball until seventh grade. And in Texas youth sport, it was a bit overwhelming. So I was a very timid youth sport, I would say, entry into basketball, but then stuck with it and eventually played Division II basketball.
At what point did you realize that you could play basketball in college?
It was in high school, probably around the time where AAU and travel leagues were becoming more of a conversation for my summertime, and my parents specifically, were open and supportive of me trying different teams, but really wanted me to have a motivation. Like we go to AAU to develop, not just kind of have fun, and so they wanted to know that I was interested in having a collegiate career, and that's when they started asking me like, "Is this something you're more serious about?" So I'd say that freshman, sophomore year when I was determining if I was going to do extra in the summertime with my time and attention and decided to, though I was, again, pretty timid and was not sure if I wanted to play college and basketball. I think the military structure had me thinking I wanted to like go be free on some big campus, but ultimately glad I did.
So when you were playing in these AAU tournaments, I mean, I'm familiar with the AAU structure and simultaneously how it has just like ballooned recently. What do you think is the main difference between the motivation of youth sport in AAU when you were playing versus now?
Yeah, I appreciated my parents really trying to get me to identify like my why or my values in playing the sport, and not just kind of going out because I was good at it or just because it was fun. And so the motivation at the time for me was to really build community and connections. But as I started to learn that it could be an avenue to get college paid for, there was a conversation around how much effort and time do we want to put into this. I think what I sit with a lot right now is the access to financial means is hitting youth sports much lower and lower. And so my experience, I was the kind of traditional chose D2. I had a couple of Division I offers, but they were like out in the middle of nowhere. I wanted to be in Austin, Texas. So, for that reason, chose a kind of more moderate athletic career. But had this been now, and there's a conversation around, even $100,000 a year, $50,000 a year, I could see my motivations shifting considering the financial means that I could have in college now.
So what was your recruitment process like to play D2?
We went to different tournaments. I got exposure from coaches. My parents were really intentional about ensuring that I was at, some of the key tournaments. Their coaches would reach out. This is like pre-social media. So this is like early 2000s. And so I remember just getting letters and I had a file cabinet system where we would file the letters and we ordered and kind of ranked the schools and the needs that my needs and what resources they had. And we used a file cabinet system to do that, and eventually solidified in a city where I thought I could still have an exciting personal social life and also still an academic rigorous campus. So that's where I kind of chose D2.
I think it's interesting when I bring athletes on who are more recent to the recruitment process because they're looking for very different things than even like the 20s and 30s and up group has been. Was mental health practitioner as part of the support staff even remotely on your mind as a benefit of the schools you were looking at?
No, certainly not in high school. And the lack of mental health support is the motivation for me to choose the career that I did. And so I don't even remember really a strong conversation about resources as much back at that time. It was really just kind of personal needs, what you felt like you could get from that campus and institution. Whereas now it's certainly where it's almost, circles of cares are being compared to one another at different schools. The resources are so transparent and kind of out there on the front end.
Was there something that led you to psychology personally, or was it just a general interest?
Yeah, so the piece my mom did not get licensed in counseling, but she got her master's degree in counseling when I was in high school. So I can't help but to think just and I majored in psychology freshman year. So I can't help but think the helping professions, supporting people was going to be in the path. It was solidified certainly in my college experience between teammates having a number of experiences. We're talking about Austin, Texas, early 2000s. So just a very vibrant social life and not a whole lot of support. And I'm not even thinking supervision, just we didn't have as many assistant coaches to check in with, or nutritionists, or strength and conditioning, just role models. And so a lot of the experiences of me and my teammates through that time made me think, man, we should really have somebody who really gets our lifestyle available to us. And I knew we had a counseling center. I was very aware of the counseling center, but there was still a disconnect in if they were going to be the appropriate fit for what I was looking for.
Did you ever engage them?
No, not voluntarily, I should say.
Involuntarily?
Yeah, so we again had a very vibrant social life. So through some RA referrals, and we did have to do a few classes as a group. But again, it was a very we were aware of the counseling resources, but did not think to use them for personal support.
So, removing yourself a bit from the recruitment process, what do you think recruits now are not doing or not looking for when vetting potential schools? Because, like, in theory, you weren't looking for mental health resources, and now that's your career.
Absolutely. I like the kind of reverse question of what are they not looking for? I know I'm trying to sit with on so in on the teams that I work with, I often am involved in the recruiting processes and sitting across families and parents and the questions that they have, and especially and I'm thinking about football and basketball. They seem to feel inundated with resources and numbers, and I'm worried. I would say I'm getting the sense that people are less focused on the like social emotional development, less focused on if this school academically personally has the resources for my student first and student athlete too. So I think we're focusing more on the athletic focused resources versus the is a city even a place that my young person can thrive in, or is this a team that has community building involved in it, or are they kind of more independent? Those are some of the questions I see people asking less of.
What do you think the impact of NIL pressures is doing to help seeking behaviors?
Certainly muddying the waters. I would say the biggest shift I have felt as a practitioner who was involved in 2019, so before 2021, and then after, it feels as if athletes have more external resources in terms of guidance. And so I would say, are leaning on school resources and internal departmental resources a bit less. That maybe because they have the financial means to kind of build their own care team, or due to some of the confidentiality, especially now that, finances are getting kind of wrapped into their participation. So I have sensed that there are agents not in competition with us in terms of guidance, but I think athletes have access to more confidential resources and more external resources that makes them more comfortable when they're making those decisions.
So, if you were an athlete coming up right now, what part of your support staff would you prioritize? If you could have any part of the support staff at your disposal, how would you craft your first ring of support?
At this point, especially across the Big Ten, I'm thinking about the circle of cares are very similar, but the families and the athletes that are asking about how available those resources are these resources that travel with you. I think that's an important question. And so for me, it would be I would really be prioritizing resources where that strength coach, athletic trainer, nutritionist are the only ones for that team, or trying to understand how large their caseload really are. So it's great to have a great strength coach, but if he has 3 or 4 teams, will your athlete get that level of care that you're seeking? And yeah, I would say in terms of the outlier that I would be leaning on is how close are your mental health resources? How close are your mental performance resources? How accessible, are they in the same building? Be asking questions about proximity. What we've learned now is that the more involved and embedded that the clinician is, the more the least stigma that the athletes have in terms of speaking with them. And so again, going on these recruiting visits, it's great to hear the spiels, but really asking about how the resources are applied.
When did you realize that you wanted to go into counseling? Because with a Bachelor of Art in Psychology, you could go a variety of different directions.
Yeah, so I again had with my experience in athletics, knew I wanted to be a counselor in athletics, but at the time it was still pretty heavily focused on sports psychologists, and so I focused my kind of graduate career and focused on children in foster care and in juvenile justice, and I really used to try to build rapport with them. I specifically was working with adolescents who were aging out of foster care and didn't have as much support, who were vulnerable to human trafficking and drug abuse, et cetera, homelessness. And so my focus really became on how I can better help these young people navigate transitions in their life, and then ultimately began to specialize in sport. But I would say my really the underpinning of my education and background is in trauma and just walking along life with people who have been through some really hard things.
Every draft, it feels like there are stories of sport being used as an escape from traumatic experiences and situations. Do you think that sport is being used correctly as that trauma response?
Hmm.
I mean, they're supposed to be feel-good stories,
Mhm.
but the
Mhm.
underpinning is absolutely not.
It's almost as if I feel um, the use of sport has been there. We've just been labeling it, I think, a bit more effectively. And so, whether it's, the use of sport in underprivileged communities as childcare or the use of sport for role model or skill development, I do get concerned when young folks who've been through hard things rely on sport as their coping outlet because of course once you get to the collegiate level it becomes more of a job. And so if we don't have other coping tools to offset, just being able to go shoot hoops in the gym, or if that becomes your job to shoot hoops well, that's no longer a relaxation tool. And so that's why a lot of, practitioners in the collegiate space are really building basic kind of mindfulness, somatic practices to counteract the fact that they've been using sport for so long as a coping tool. And now it's, become more of a pressure point for them.
Yeah, I mean, and what do you tell an athlete who has sports set as their not only escape, but their way to make money, their way to get to college? I mean,
Yeah. I've been sitting with the idea of like we spend so much time focusing on these like evidence-based interventions and programming. At the end of the day, what I've set with this summer, especially with some of our younger football players, was they need hobbies and they need to have the time to like play Legos without it being like a task or to just do art, just kind of freely. They don't have time to engage in free play very much. And so in some ways, I'm thinking we need to kind of go back old school at this point and less of the, how much can they learn? Social emotional skills are important, but at the same time, just letting them free play, I think, would go a long way as well.
how do you tell someone at a Power Five institution like Ohio State that they should chill out a bit? Like,
Just
well,
like
how does
that,
that conversation begin?
I will say oftentimes it does begin on the court. So I will shoot hoops, especially with our football guys, just to kind of show them that I use it as stress management, but to also just open up that it doesn't have to be this clinical. Like I'll kind of take a lap with them and talk about like, hey, what are you going to do after practice today? And they're like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, well, let's think of 3 things you might be interested in trying out and like tell me how it goes the next day. So it's as simple as you're interested in fashion. Like, what about looking more into that? And really just leaning into their interest. But it can be hard. It's a bit easier in the summertime, of course, but it can be hard to get them to try new things when they've got so much that they're focused on learning and trying to achieve.
I know we were talking about not relying on the sport that got you to college as a stress reliever, but how do you feel about cross training for that purpose?
Overall, I love the idea of cross training in a, in a safe way. I have found that, or I've seen that athletes who either have another sport or like the arts have been a really big kind of passion for folks that I've seen them be able to engage in like after games to really calm down. They seem to have more longevity in the sport and have less burnout and frustration with their sport when they have a secondary or a third kind of option. And I would say having both like a secondary physical option and a secondary stationary option, because what I've also seen is some of our athletes get injured and also can't do like the golfing or the fishing on the side, and so they feel really limited. But if having some other type of stationary activities that they can engage in would be helpful.
When did you realize that you wanted to work specifically in crisis counseling? Because that is so cool. Like, I'm such a fan.
I know it's almost like I don't know if I knew it or it just happened and I loved it. But I my first job out of college was working at a residential treatment center for children and teens where I was, on night shift really supporting their just physical health because a bachelor's degree in psychology couldn't do much clinical work, but it was in that process that I learned really trauma-informed principles. I'm 6 feet tall, Black woman, and so with some of these younger children, especially children from other areas who maybe hadn't been around folks like me, being just mindful of my size, my tone of voice, getting on their level, making eye contact. I learned a lot of those trauma-informed principles hands-on, working with young people, and then as I started working with teenagers, recognizing that those skills were helping me become successful in meeting them where they were. And so it really just continued to build and expand into now where I really care about bringing trauma-informed principles into athletic departments.
How does that conversation begin when you have an athlete that comes in and you need to implement this trauma-informed counseling?
I know it can sound kind of wooey, but it really it starts with positioning myself in terms of removing power dynamics and trying to remove power dynamics, positioning myself to be approachable, being accessible to them, both physically in physical space, but also they know they can text me. And I think early on, there's a lot of communication about, what it will look like to meet with me, times that I'm available, over time, let's say that there's a couple of guys that we're aware of that have some significant trauma histories. I'm really just trying to build a relationship from afar, and help them see me as a trusting person that when they're ready to talk about, if they're ever ready to talk about it, that I can be there for them. So it's pretty informal and passive, and slowly starts to build until um, there's some guys who we don't even talk about the deep stuff, but they're just aware that I'm aware that they have stuff going on. And if they did need support in the future, that I could be there for them. So try to also be mindful of, levels of depth to go in therapy, and especially with, athletes and times of the year. But yeah, overall, I would say it's the way I kind of operate in life. So sometimes I can get stuck on how to name it because it's become so ingrained on just like how I walk into a coffee shop. I'm like, wanting to make eye contact and being mindful of my space and stature and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a stigma about help-seeking behaviors as a whole. And then furthermore, when you are trying to process whatever trauma it is, how do you, as the practitioner, build that rapport immediately?
I think first is normalizing whatever they're feeling. Oftentimes, particularly with young men, and I'm thinking about football and basketball, they're often not going to seek me out unless they're about to lose something, like lose playing time, a relationship, or they are significantly impaired to the point where they really need assistance. And so, um, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
What do you see as being the first step in building rapport with an athlete who needs that trauma-informed counseling stance?
Yeah, it makes me think of shared power. And so I say that shared power, meaning if someone's a few minutes late, I don't take that as an opportunity to call them out, but rather say, hey, it's cool being flexible. Maybe next time let's try this, or consistent presence for myself. And so if I'm going to be there Tuesdays at 8, ensuring that I'm also, available at that time because they're also watching to see if I'm somebody that's actually going to be there consistently. Um, Asking questions. I try to be extremely flexible on the front end when scheduling. And so if I know I need to get somebody into weekly therapy, but there's a little bit of resistance, I'll try to start off with like, hey, just give me 10 minutes this week. We can grab some food and then we'll start from there. And then next week they're like, oh, this isn't so bad. And eventually we'll kind of work up to it. So I would say, again, that shared power. I'm not like, oh, it has to be 50 minutes every week or this isn't clinical enough. Trying to reframe it of, meeting them where they are to get them in the door.
How much do you share about your personal life and your relationship with sport when trying to relate to these athletes? Because I feel like psychologists are kind of steered away from implementing their own anecdotes. But when you're working with someone who is already rather resistant to the process, how much do you share about yourself?
Especially here at Ohio State and given my kind of Division II background, it can go either way. So it can be helpful, and in some ways, it's still not enough of a relative experience for it to make sense. But if appropriate, absolutely, I will share my experiences, whether in college seeking help seeking, especially with my own therapist. I'm very forward with that. I would say I would on overall I'm pretty conservative when it comes to self-disclosure. I'm thinking about some of my colleagues who maybe went to Ohio State and kind of have more of that embedded culture in their sport journey. That might be a bit more of a selling point, but for me, it's really been being curious about, especially with football, given that I'm a woman and just being curious about the sport. They seem to really appreciate just the fact that I really want to be involved in their reps and different drills. And that has been really the factor I think that's led them to have more buy-in from me.
Is this your dream job?
Absolutely. This is absolutely my dream job. I've sat with that because the last 6 years, I got my PhD while being here. So really got to even like study my dream job. And at this point, I'm just really interested in ensuring that other clinicians who have this as a dream job, it can be sustainable as a field and that we can provide resources in a way that allows clinicians to stay in it for a long time.
So I know you were talking about athletes, specifically male athletes in football and basketball, that only come to you in times of crisis. What is a clue that an athlete may be nearing that point? So say you're a coach or an athletic trainer. What are some behaviors or some keys verbally that you should be looking for or listening for?
Not that this is so prescribed, but oftentimes when I hear men say they feel overwhelmed, or extremely stressed out, to me, that it's often a sign that they're feeling off. Something feels different, or the way that they're usually coping is off. Um, I would also say any behaviors that are, out of the ordinary for that individual, whether that's, consecutive lateness or, with the role that I have now, I'm just so grateful that I have so much data, but it could be shifts in appetite or, weight trends changing, grades changing. And it really is just any shift in the person's normal functioning leads to just a question. Hey, I noticed that your weight had been dropping. How have you been feeling? Have you had any troubles eating? I noticed that your grades have changed. It's really the open door to the conversation. Or again, like when men say they're feeling very overwhelmed, that really makes me kind of curious about what that means for their sleep and their appetite.
There are so many stories of athletes whose crises were not picked up on. What do you think we can do as a collective unit of support to ensure that no other foundations have to be made?
The next step that I'm thinking about in terms of care for athletes is that systemic care and ensuring that we don't just have the people in place because now we've got everybody kind of positioned, but it's how they can all work together effectively. Because what I've also seen is, a few people have noticed the change in behavior or noticed the concern, but kind of tell themselves, oh, well, they're seeing the nutritionist, so I'm sure it's fine. Or, well, I know Sharon's around at practice, so I'm sure, they'll get connected that way. But I think we still have to work to be more mental health literate and really being direct about the questions of, are you okay? Do you need some more assistance? That's the piece that I think um, we're still missing. We have, more people at the table, but I think continuing to ask the questions and being consistently present when they have the answers.
So I thought it was interesting that you were kind of listing off things that you look for, changes in behaviors. What kind of data are you consistently looking at and monitoring in athlete mood, behavior, thought processes?
And so as a clinician, we use the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7 to monitor clinical symptoms of anxiety and depression are kind of the baselines. But because we have so much access to, potentially weights of folks week in, week out, we can identify trends in their stressors kind of related to their appetites and their weights, grades. We've also started looking at like force plate data. Right now, we're working on a research project where we're trying to see if we can parallel force plate data with stressors. And so if someone's how high they're jumping starts to decrease over time, does that correlate with any mental health symptoms that we're also tracking and trying to see the parallel there? Because we know that, with stress in our hips and our midsection can really start to be impaired. And so we are trying to advance in that way. But in terms of the access that we have right now, for me, it's really that sleep and appetite. And if we have some Aura rings or Whoop data, that can be really helpful to try to catch trends a little sooner.
What other physiological data are you looking at?
So we have our catapult
Very
data.
interesting.
I wouldn't say I've used the catapult data incredibly consistently, but we've had a few athletes that were dealing with some anxiety pre and post practice, where looking at heart rate changes throughout practice and having access to that in real time was really insightful. And I could kind of pull over the athlete and say, hey, how are you feeling right now in comparison to where your heart rate's at for some kind of biofeedback in the moment. We don't do a ton of biofeedback just because of the time demands that we currently have, but that would be the ideal, is to really get to use. They're already wearing, so many different wearables for their performance. How can we use that same data to prevent or intervene more appropriately?
Where do you see the requests of your job going as these athletes become more, hopefully, outgoing with what they're going through?
What we've noticed now is really even a demand for more consistent programming with our team. So, yes, we're around for the team talks, but really wanting to hold a space where athletes are getting to talk to one another, getting to build cohesion in that way. We throw so many different apps and resources at them, but we're losing the connectivity piece of them just being in a room talking about their feelings. And so I really think, again, we're going to end up going back to the basics because a lot of our athletes, especially with COVID, didn't develop those social skills in terms of conflict management or how to communicate for your needs. And so we're going to have to create spaces to help them practice that, in my mind, to help them be successful socially and not just kind of transfer when things get hard. I want to give them some more tools.
When you are working with an athlete who is going through a crisis situation, who are the periphery interviews with? Because ideally, this athlete has a whole team around them. Who do you go to first to monitor changes?
I would say my first person in mind is athletic trainer, given how, they're seeing them before practice, they're seeing them after practice, they've noticed trends over times, and that's really their main focus, is their well-being. And so I'm checking in with athletic trainer to see if there's been any, new physical ailments or any conversations in the training room that have changed. I'm thinking about coaches from a performance standpoint. And the question in my mind is, are coaches aware or concerned about this athlete's performance? Like, really the question is, is it impacting them on the field or court? Has it gotten to that level? And then teammates and family. I think in the back of my mind, I'm wondering if they have noticed changes in this person. So I'll often ask the person, has family have noticed any concerns about you lately? Have they asked about any changes in you lately? And they'll either say, like, yeah, but my mom's worried about my sleeping, or Yeah, my teammates have noticed that I've been a bit more withdrawn lately, and so that can kind of help me get some external data of what's going on.
With the invent of social media and these parasocial relationships that fans have with athletes now, how has that changed the impact of your job?
So in some ways, I've been, thinking about the brand management and I would say one of the concerns I have is more so when we think about these parasocial relationships is that there's not much room for flexibility and trying on different roles and hats and experiences. And so it can feel really rigid. And so that's what I would say I notice is creating this brand and then feeling like you have to maintain said brand while you're also changing and, growing as a young adult. Um, Family pressure to, I think that's the biggest one is family pressure for compensation or support, financial support, because the athletes have already kind of been feeling like, oh, I can, give back or if I get a scholarship. But now with the financial means that are on the table, oftentimes with family potentially playing as an advocate or agent for the athlete, there can be some pressures on how many financial responsibilities that they're taking on at any given time.
With the trauma counseling and the crisis counseling that you have done so far, when in the event that these athletes go pro, I mean, we hear stories about buying homes and cars and priorities being all over the place. When you have an athlete who has made it, but immediately loses focus, what would you say to them to get them back on track? Or who would you enlist to assist them?
Yeah, I'm thinking about, who are the influential people in that young person's life at that time, and it would vary. Bringing them back to longevity. I think a lot of right now there's a lot of money on the table. There's a lot of lump sums amount of monies that our athletes are making, but I'm talking to them about longevity and trying to be here for a movement and not just a moment, trying to like create change and not just, have this viral moment. And so that has kind of got some buy-in from them as they recognize that things can come and go so quickly. They've seen it happen into other athletes, but bringing them back to what is your why in terms of this deal or this next chapter, and how can we kind of cushion you with those resources as you continue to grow. But the to me, we're right at the beginning of where this is going to go until we really understand the impacts. But that is my concern now is just um, the level of money and the younger that they're getting, their ability to make those decisions for themselves and for their own why versus financial means.
What signals to you in an athlete that you're working with that they've had a breakthrough emotionally, mentally?
They less often do they say it though. Sometimes they're like, wow, I didn't realize I could get here, or when they're surprised by their own growth or their own change in a response. I had a young man this week um, set a boundary around his time and capacity very organically. Like it wasn't even something he was trying to do. And so we were talking about how it's, he's naturally protecting his energy and time. Whereas when we first started working together, it might have taken a few tussles of like, okay, maybe try this text message or, more intentional about it. Sometimes I would say the breakthrough happens when athletes kind of discontinue services with me. Some folks get what they need and they feel really great and they're kind of back on the field and feel like they can throw themselves back into their sport again, even though sometimes I would like to continue the work, through a more, resolved place. But sometimes they feel really like this one tool really assisted and they feel like they have what they need to keep going on their own as well.
How many athletes would you say you have worked with up to this point?
Cool. Yeah, I mean, gotta be thousands. Just given the size, I would guesstimate thousands. could probably do some quick math. Yeah, probably over. Yeah, at that point, I would say that if we have 1,000, 1,000 athletes in a given year, and I've been here for 6 years, I would say 3,000 or so athletes.
That's
I've not
incredible.
thought about it. I know I had not thought about it really in some, but it's been some time.
So, what do you think has been the biggest difference from you as a practitioner, from athlete one to athlete 3,000 and counting?
I am far more okay with uncertainty than I was at the beginning. And I think that's just having walked alongside athletes from, COVID times to coming into the NIL era and a variety of other concerns. I have come to realize that our role is not to be the expert, but is to be a steady force as they are navigating all these changes, which requires us to, do our own care, ensure that we're not getting lost in the tensions in the pools, but is really being that grounding force for them throughout their collegiate career where they can keep coming to for support as things change.
How has your stance on working with this population changed?
One thing that's sticking out to me is at the beginning, I really wanted to reach as many athletes as possible. And what that, looked like was me, trying to get more folks into therapy, get more folks into performance sessions. And what feels different now is the recognition that our role in our relationship in and of itself is therapeutic. And so I may not meet with everyone on a team individually, but my goal is to have a relationship with everyone on that team. So if and when there is a concern, they can feel comfortable coming to me. So at the beginning, I might have been looking at, oh, is the whole basketball team meeting with me, or how do we change that? But it's really about zooming out and again building a more psychologically safe system, which may mean meeting with me individually, but it could be me passing resources to coaches to be more positive in their interaction. So I think from my beginning work, I have zoomed out into a more holistic view of the role versus kind of being that one-on-one clinician.
Kind of along those same lines, how have the crises that these athletes are talking about and going through changed since you started in this profession?
Certainly there's an element of um, more advanced financial crises. I think our athletes are more involved in some financial situations. In some ways can help more, but in other ways, um, given the amount of money that they either have made, could make, I think the pressures, the decision-making pressures have changed. So whether it was, I'm trying to think of a silly example back in my time. I don't know, whether or not to take a road trip, to another city. Whereas now, these athletes have access to like get to an island and, buy a new car when they get there. And so the level of decision making it's the same decision making concerns. They're just louder consequences given the financial access. And then the transferring was not, when I first started, transferring was not as much of a, clear path as it is now. And so with that decision making, I'm seeing athletes, take a shorter amount of time to assess if they want to be at a school or, kind of by midway through the season, they're thinking about what other options they have. Whereas back at the beginning, it was, more of a thought of, okay, next year, this is what I'll do differently. Yeah.
I think it's interesting when I interview athletes who have utilized the transfer portal once, twice, three times. Do you approach your consulting with kind of franchise players differently than you would with someone who is fresh off the transfer portal?
Not, there's no, I wouldn't say there was a blanket difference. I'm mindful of their expectations. I'm mindful of the pressures placed on them. But either way, I'm going to be curious about their awareness of that role and what they want to do with that information.
And then how do you think that athletes can use the platform that we as spectators and supporters have given them to advocate for mental health resources and the greater mental health conversation?
It's making me think of the applied elements of the work. I think, athletes have really used their platforms to talk about their struggles, to talk about the ways that they've sought help. The next, element would be identifying, what resources, what tools did they use that they found really helpful. That might be a bit tangible for younger athletes to say, oh, wow, this person, this is how they meditate or this is how they visualize. Sorry, could you say the question again?
How can athletes use social media and NIL platforms to advance conversations about mental health?
Yeah, I think in terms of the NIL platforms, there are certainly companies and brands who are wellness minded. And I think it'd be really cool for an athlete to, kind of say that in my NIL deals and contracts, the company has to, have a certain level of mental health awareness or campaigns or acknowledgement of struggles that people face. And so I could see athletes taking a more assertive stance of, I only work with companies that are kind of pro mental health or have resources. Um, Or I think even challenging against like, sharing your mental health story and just kind of sharing more personal life stories and maybe making it less about mental health and just getting people normalized to sharing experiences and storytelling. I think that could be a really cool way to also destigmatize.
So if someone is listening to this episode and is finding solace in your process as a consultant, what resources would you send them to?
If an athlete's listening to this,
What are some resources that you would suggest they look into?
I'm trying to be specific, even though I try to build individual plans. But my biggest thing is, helping athletes, helping people feel safe in their bodies. And so really focusing them on some mind body techniques, I think would be a really, easy entry point into learning more about, crisis counseling, if you will, and really just how to be aware of your past experiences and how they impact your current state of mind and how your future decisions could be impacted. So again, mindfulness, emotional regulation in terms of interpersonal relationships. The book that I've been reading most recently is The Anxious Generation, which has allowed me to be a bit more empathetic towards COVID and social media and have a more of a curiosity on how we can support young people facing increased anxiety with, more technology and access to more virtual worlds. Yeah, I hate to rattle off just a bunch of books. I'm trying to kind of think of some more just avenues because there's a tons of books you can read, but yeah, I think for me it really comes down to like knowing you're being safe in your body. So whether that's implementing workout routines, getting to the gym, um, to doing massages, doing acupuncture, like whatever it is that helps you release tension in your body would be a good entry point, I would say.
What kind of companies or advocacy organizations would you suggest people interested in this avenue or help-seeking behaviors should look into?
Yeah, and for some reason I'm feeling really hesitant to like name or specify. So I send like my clients a variety of like it's like follow this page on Instagram or follow, but I don't like largely. Yeah, I'm having a hard time specifying on like just a general, counseling platform that I feel confident saying.
Yeah. I mean, I do not use this platform as much for self-help as a resource as I do as a storytelling platform, but I do appreciate when practitioners include resources to the topic we've talked about, or if they think that listeners would find pertinent details at this website or in this book or watch this video. But if you do not feel comfortable with sharing those resources, or if they're Ohio State specific and you just don't feel like they'd be applicable, we can totally move on.
No, yeah, it's an easy question. I'm sitting with why it feels murkier. Yeah, I mean, I could say the body keeps the score in books like that, but they could all of them would be helpful. But there isn't like one other than the anxious generation in terms of social media right now. I would say is like a big one.
What do you focus on to make you better?
I often take the same approach that I share with athletes, and I'm like looking up at my whiteboard because every year I want to be more intentional about like treating it like a new season. And because we already kind of as athletes have that kind of year to year, season to season setting goals kind of ingrained in us. And so thinking about like right now, I'm thinking about fall camp starts tomorrow. That'll be kind of like that next season for me is fall camp through playoffs, right? The national championship. For me, it's also identifying what's my why going into this year and this season. This is my sixth year being here, and I don't want to just kind of do the same thing every year. And so I am sitting with Simon Sinek's book, Find Your Why, which is an old book, but really just to like reframe what I want to get out of the season, especially with the team that's won a national championship as a clinician. There are always there's more to learn, more research questions to ask, how do teams go back to back? How can I support a team that has the pressure to go back to back? And so I am right now in the middle of kind of looking at the next, 6 months and kind of breaking it up from there. But for me, I have to stay grounded in it, or I'll get lost into the week to week of games, and then basketball season starts and supporting them. So I stay really grounded on what I'm, adding, how I'm adding value to these teams, and then how I'm developing as well.
How do you make sure that you get to the individuals that would request your assistance? Because I mean, you're working with massive rosters.
Absolutely. And it takes a team. And so I think the first part is, being in the right meetings in the right spaces where information is being shared, where trends are being shared, academic meetings, and then it's having a relationship with everybody on the sport performance or who, on that team staff so that, yes, you're right. I can't be the one that sees all of the concerns, but I can be a consultant and, coaches seeing the concerns. But if they don't feel comfortable coming to me, it doesn't really do them any good. So I also focus on the relationship building element of it as well.
Those are all of my questions for you. Is there anything that you think that I missed about putting the work that you do into perspective?
Let me see. I jot some notes down.
I love that you're prepared. I love that. You're like, let me go through my notes and see what she missed.
If there was anything else. I'm still kind of new to the being out in the social world
Oh,
space.
you did
So,
amazingly.
thank you.
Like, thank you. Don't thank me. It's so funny when I have guests on and they thank me. I'm like, I'm your fan. Stop thanking me. Like,
You provided the space so well.
I provide the space so that people like you can share the amazing work that you do. And the last thing I want to do is miss a single bit of it. So if there is anything that I did miss right now, the floor is yours.
You
Hype
know,
yourself up.
well, no, I'm just thinking about one element of NIL to the age of revenue sharing. And an element of concern that has arisen is kind of like salary conversations. So the same way that as employers have a variety of approaches to whether employees should share their salaries with one another, and there's conversations around that. What's happening in locker rooms is kind of the same thing, where there's conversations around, how much schools are going to be paying each athlete and player and playing time. And so I think that'll add an interesting locker room dynamic, kind of cohesion element of monetizing performance, what that will do to the team dynamic.
Do you think that paying college players was the right move?
My instinct is no, given the way that it's gone. I think there was a problem. I don't know that this was the solution in this way, but I think it'll take some time before we get to like landing in the middle. But we very aggressively responded to a real valid concern. But I think we've created a monster of other concerns now as well.
How do you define an amateur athlete?
An athlete who chooses to participate in a sport on a team for development.
I'll take it. Anything else that you would like to talk about or speak to before we conclude?
No, I don't think so.
Awesome. Let me see when this episode will come out, and I will get that to you. All right, so you will be episode 125 of this podcast.
Nice. Wow.
Sick. And this episode will come out on August 26th.
Nice. The first day of school.
So you have about a month. If anything happens that you would like included between now and then, shoot me a LinkedIn DM. I can update the script. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming on. Can you pronounce your name for me?
Yes, Charron Sumler.
Awesome. And then I will reach back out once this episode is published. I hope you love it. Thank you so much for
No,
coming.
this has been super fun and it stretches me out of my comfort zone. So I appreciate you holding the
You
space.
did great. So in
Thank
case that
you.
was a concern, there's nothing to worry about. Uh,
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the work that you do as well. I do not normally speak to this side of the athlete experience, and I think that it was really interesting to kind of look into the side of the athlete experience that you work with. I appreciate this kind of dialogue and opening my eyes personally to this side of the atmosphere.
Yeah, yeah, and some great questions to get us going. So I appreciate it too.
Thank you so much. Have a great
Yeah,
day.
you too. Bye-bye.